Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. Today we're exploring whether Canada is experiencing what's known as the Great Resignation and asking whether the nonprofit sector is still seen as a desirable career path. Or has burnout and inequitable workplaces caused a large exodus from the sector and high turnover, especially at the leadership level? Joining me today is Maryann Kerr, Chief Happiness Officer and CEO with the Medalist Group. Maryann has worked in the social impact sector for 34 years, and as a governance, leadership, and culture specialist, Maryann published her first book in 2021 entitled Tarnished: Let's Rethink, Reimagine, and Co-Create a New Social Impact Sector. Welcome, Maryann, and thank you for joining me.
I'm really thrilled to be here, Mary. Thank you for having me.
Well, Maryann, we've heard, in the media that there's sort of questions as to whether this is actually happening in Canada. And in your opinion, and from what you have seen and experienced, is the nonprofit sector currently facing a great resignation?
Well, I think what we're experiencing, and I think what the world is actually experiencing in terms of the labor force, is more of a great migration. But it's a migration that's been happening. If you look at the data, and it's primarily available in the US, it's much harder to find Canadian statistics. But the last 10 years, the turnover rate has increased every year. So technically, you could say we've had a great resignation every year for the last 10 years. However, when you look at turnover rates, so last year, turnover from sort of June 2019 to June 2020 in Canada, it was about 8.8%. And from June 2020 to June 2021, it was 8.1%. So in fact, there hasn't been a dramatic shift in the turnover rate, but in charitable organizations, I have worked in organizations with turnover rates that are staggeringly high. So 30%, 40%, 50%. These are not unusual numbers to see. And sometimes it's organization-wide. Sometimes it's within one area of an organization. So that's telling you a story. So there is definitely an issue in our sector.
So what are your thoughts on what's being described as a burnout epidemic, particularly in the nonprofit sector? Is this what is driving this kind of migration you're talking about?
Yeah. I don't think it's the burnout. I think the burnout is a symptom of a different problem. So burnout may be causing people to leave organizations, but why are they burning out, right? We come into the sector, I believe, we tend to be people that care about the world. We care about a particular issue in the world. We're interested in making change. And we suffer from something called compassion fatigue, right? So you're not only caring about the work that you do and the people your organization seeks to serve, but you're dealing with now, the added piece of having to be worried about a worldwide global pandemic. And so I think that people are burning out, but the burnout itself isn't the problem. The problem is what's happening in organizations to cause folks to burn out.
Well, maybe you could talk a little bit about your new book, Tarnished, because I think that's what that explores. And perhaps could you describe or give us your insights on whether the nonprofit sector is really living up to its own values in terms of how it treats its staff and runs and operates within the sector itself?
Yeah. I think it's a great question, Mary. There are good organizations where that absolutely is true. But in my experience and in the conversations I had writing the book, so many people, dozens of people shared with me really difficult stories about workplace culture, about leadership, about governance, and those three things really tended to be at the root of all of the issues. So if I'm suffering burnout, it's because I have a leader who's not necessarily taking care of a team, right? Or I have a board that is pressuring a CEO in such a way that trickles down through the whole organization. I think we have really systemic issues in the sector, at a time when we're literally questioning everything, right? Is the whole system of philanthropy working? And if it is working, who's it working for? If it's not working, why not? And what can we do? These are really big pieces of kind of not just, these are huge questions to be asking ourselves, and at the same time trying to continue to do our work, right? Trying to continue to deliver service, trying to raise money in a very difficult climate. So a focus for organizations on those three things, leadership, governance, and culture, can have a really huge impact on what happens for those that work in that organization.
So it sounds like you're describing a circumstance that many organizations and the people within it are finding themselves in. So because of the pandemic and the additional stresses and workload in many cases and mental health issues arising from the pandemic, it's exacerbating something that is already problematic within the actual workplace. So things around governance, culture, the way that management treats its staff, and the way the culture in the organization is actually exacerbating some of these problems. Am I getting that right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'm always sort of smiling to myself. You know, when we have things like Bell Mental Health Day, Let's Talk Day. You know, these are great things. But you know, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing as organizations to take care of the mental health of the folks who work with us, and not cause more problems? Because I think you can definitely see a connection between poor workplaces and poor mental health, poor workplaces and poor mental health. So, you know, creating psychologically safe workplaces, creating workplaces where employees feel you actually listen to them and you value what they have to say. And with the pandemic, the number one thing I have tried to put forward is this idea of minimizing our expectations of people, right? And I know that's tough, right? Because charitable organizations, nonprofits, social impact sector organizations, they've never been needed more than they're needed now, right? The demand for some has just been unbelievable. But at the same time, we need to think about how can we deliver that without taking it out on these, you know, kind people who have come to this sector to do their good work.
Now, your book, and I know in some of your public speaking, you do talk quite a bit about workplace bullying and harassment. Are you seeing this in the nonprofit sector, and do you feel this is contributing to the turnover that you're describing?
Oh, absolutely. And I think when you experience workplace bullying in the social impact space, it's somehow worse, right? Because you go into an organization and you think this is perhaps a social justice organization. They care. The work that they're doing is very mission focused. So you're a little bit shocked, actually, to discover that leaders can be bullies, that coworkers can be bullies, that, you know, it's a combination of all kinds of things like micromanaging, like diminishing people's work, like excluding people from information and meetings they need in order to be effective. You know, when you add all of those kinds of things together, it creates a really unsafe environment. And I do think that I see better, and people I know who have worked in both. So I've always been in the nonprofit charitable space, but people I know who have worked in both and have transitioned back out of our sector say it's much worse here, much worse here. And I have some theories on why. I think that in the corporate sector, there is more thought and resource given to the idea that if we take care of our employees will take care of our business, right? There is a really strong sense that is true. It's been proven over and over. I talk about some examples in my book of a $3 billion organization in the United States. That's their whole focus. Everything revolves around the employee, and they're at the center and the heart of every single decision. I think that we don't invest in that idea. We don't invest in leadership training. We don't invest in coaching. We don't invest in organizational health in general. We think Organizational health, well, that's about making sure I have the right data systems in place or the right technology in order to be able to, pivot, let's say, in the time of a pandemic. And, yes, of course, that's important. But organizational health is really well beyond technology, beyond finance, beyond fundraising, beyond how many, LinkedIn followers or Twitter, connections I have. It's about how do I work with other people? It's about the relationships around the leadership table. It's the relationships around the board table. It's the expression of our values and the expression of our vision in everything that we do. Right. And that's organizational health. It's an organization that is working because we're taking care of each other. We're thoughtful about everything that we do and say, and it reflects the value system that we've agreed upon when we came into an organization, in that recruitment process, and you checked the website and you saw this list of beautiful values. And then, you're a few weeks or months into an organization and it's like getting hit by a truck. What is happening? This is not what I signed up for. And it happens over and over again. It's a real shock.
Are you seeing also examples of people who may well have joined an organization and are really quite now sensitized to the need for more equitable workplaces within the culture for people of underrepresented groups? And while an organization talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the programs that they have once they recruit them, there's a challenge about how much that culture is actually inclusive and equitable. Are you seeing anything like that as part of the description of the kind of toxic workplaces that we see in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a chapter in the book where I interview Janelle Benjamin, who has a company called All Things Equitable. And, we talk about the need to, it isn't about diversity, it is about inclusion, right? And what are the things that you need to do? What are the meaningful things that need to happen in order to create an equitable and inclusive workplace? But, when you think of just in general, without thinking about all of the different forms of diversity, I come into organizations as a neurodiverse person. I have ADHD. So, for instance, I'm terrible with numbers. So, probably my statistics really are off by a point or two. I'm really bad with numbers. And I lived my career as a fundraiser. There was no space in the organizations where I worked for that type of diversity. And that's nothing compared to what you are facing day by day as a racialized person in any organization pretty much in this country, right? If you're working in an organization where the vast majority of the workforce is white or white presenting, you're coming to work code switching, you're having to dress differently, you may have to wear your hair differently. You get kind of forced into this space of, this is how everybody else is, so I should be too. And that's the piece for all of this, all elements of inclusivity. It's about embracing really broadly the idea that we are unique individuals and we need to be able to bring our whole unique, authentic self to work. And really, for me, authenticity is easier as a white woman. People are not trying to touch my hair. Nobody is suggesting that the music I listen to or the food I bring in at lunch or any of those things are a problem. I mean, I've worked in organizations where I have seen and heard these things happening. And so it's a big part of it. It's a big part of the reason why people leave organizations or end up stuck in an organization at a much lower level than they should be, right? They're not given the opportunities that they should have.
So what should leaders be doing right now to address these toxic work environments and these inequities within the nonprofit sector workplace? And how can they better support their people?
I always start with this. I think it's time to radically listen to the people we work with, radically listen to their lived experience, and create the space that's needed for people to be able to openly and honestly share what's happening without fear of retribution. Right? I think that's really the place to start, because we talk about organizations as though they are these inanimate objects, but in fact, organizations are simply made up of human beings, right? So let's start by listening to each other and listening with open hearts and open minds and spirits that say, we want to successfully move this mission forward. How can we best do this? And let's involve in all of that, the community we seek to serve, right? So it's in a sense, human-centered design. That's really what I think we need to be doing. We need to rethink our organizations with human beings at the center.
And how does a leader or a board set that in motion? What steps do they need to take?
I think that's always the hardest question. We all say that thing about a journey starts with a single step, but the question is, what is that single step? I believe that first step is dependent largely on where you are in the process and how much work needs to be done. So, the work I do as a consultant is about coming in, helping an organization to do that radical listening tour, to find out, to get a sense, to set a benchmark on where they are. So I think that's a part of it. The other thing, and this is such an inexpensive tool, we have this great program out there called the Nonprofit Employer of Choice. It is a very inexpensive process to go through, and it's the beginning. It sets in process at the beginning of finding out, where staff morale is, what they're happy about, what they're not happy about, what's working, what's not working. So again, it's a bit of a dive into finding out where the organization is, so that you can figure out where you need to go, and involving all those people in the discussion around what will our organization look like a year, 2 years, 5 years from now? Where are we headed? What do we want it to be? How do we decolonize, right? How do we share power? There's so much to do. And there's so many kind of spokes on that wheel of the places we can start.
And may I ask, just in terms of the burnout that you sort of say is the symptom, but not the why you have the symptom, in terms of kind of a tool to help address this, what do you think about the recent legislation referred to as the right to disconnect in Ontario? Do you think it's going to be helpful in protecting staff and organizations from the impact of burnout? What do you think about it?
Honestly, I've talked a lot with my husband about it, because he works in an industry where it's shift work, right? And it's there are so many considerations around it. I think one of the things we've embraced with the pandemic has been this idea of being flexible. If your organizational culture can manage it, right? I may work from 6 until 8:30, and then when the kids are maybe 8, and then when the kids are up, I'm taking care of that and getting them sorted, and then I may not be back at my desk till 10 o'clock, and that happens towards the end of the day too. So on the one hand, I think, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But ultimately, policies and even legislation, these do not change behavior. What changes behavior is when leaders do the internal work they need to do to understand how to be human in a workplace, right? Because I have always, at the bottom of my email, there's something that says, and I took it from someone else. I loved it. It said, this is not part of your working day. When you receive this, please feel free to ignore me and respond when it is your working day. And I think that's a human response to a difficult time. And so will policies and procedures help? Yes. Imagine Canada has a whole new set of HR policies available for our sector, which is amazing. I know you guys put all kinds of good work in this area. And so it's great to have that content and information. But at the end of the day, even legislation doesn't change behavior. It takes human beings to do that.
And so I'd like you to sort of take a step back and look at the big picture and tell me what your thoughts are on the future of the nonprofit work in Canada and where organizations need to go from here. And if you have any advice for leaders to make that happen.
Well, I'm concerned about the sector. I see a lot of job postings. I see that people are having difficulty filling some of the roles. So I'm concerned. But I'm also really hopeful because I see really bright, smart young people coming into the sector right at the beginning of their careers, which was, in my generation, it wasn't necessarily the first thing we thought to do, right? So I think you see a lot more of that now. So I'm hopeful. And I think my advice would be listen to those young people. Listen to those young people because they're driving what the future is going to look like. And they know they don't put up with what we did, what I did as a young person in the workforce. It would never have occurred to me to expect that I could be flexible in my daily hours. If it said 9 to 5, I was 9 to 5, and then you did all the overtime as well. Right? It would never occur to me that in the middle of a day I could take my dog for a walk or even consider that I could bring my dog to work, right? All of these kinds of things. Listen to the young people, right? Because their expectations are different and their expectations are right.
Maryann, thank you so much for your insights. I'm sure your advice and your book will be an enormous help for sector leaders and organizations. And so we're very appreciative that you could join us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.